And I'm just going to get this right out of the gate. I know some of you are looking at me and saying, what in the heck is this kid doing? These are real glasses, I will tell you that. I bought some new glasses, and I was going to go old school. And then Lori, after she saw them on me last night, said, you look ridiculous. And I said, I'm okay with that. And she dared me to slick my hair back and kind of do the 70s look. And I thought it's perfect because we're starting a series in the Old Testament. And so I said, I'm going to go old school today and probably throughout the entire year, because here's the deal. 1 Samuel is going to take us, honestly, all the way through 2019. There are 31 chapters in this book. And I know some of you are like, back to expositional preaching, expository preaching. Some of you are like, what is that word? I just came for breakfast, you know. It's okay. Like when we did a series kind of verse by verse through Ephesians, which is 6 chapters, it took me a whole year. So we're not going to be able to do it. There's 31 chapters. That would take us, like 5 years to work through that. So what we're going to do is very similar to 1 Corinthians series. We're going to work through it kind of chapter by chapter, and some of those chapters we're going to breeze right through, and then there's going to be some places where we really slow down and focus. And I hope that you get a lot out of it. I've been praying that you get a lot out of this series, and we're going to see right from the very beginning, right from the get-go, even our background information this morning, that this is absolutely applicable to our lives today. It happened about this account is about 3,000 years old. The things that we're going to be reading about and studying about 1100 BC. But there still is, we live in the same type of world that they found themselves in at that point. And so we will take some breaks here in this series like we did in 1 Corinthians, you know, during some holidays, Easter and Christmas and things like that. And then we'll do like a relationship series, a little 4-parter or something like that. But we will be in 1 Samuel for a long time. So I want you to read it. I want you to study it and begin to get familiar with the characters in this narrative. Now, just to give you some background, because I know not a lot of people know the Old Testament, maybe know the New Testament, you know a lot of what Jesus did and things like that, but just to give you some background before we get into this series, and this is going to be a trick because I still have to cover chapter 1 today, which is a big and long chapter. I'm going to read it, but I got to give you the background too, and so I'm going to kind of burn through some of this. The overall narrative for the Israelites, and remember, God chose these people in Genesis. He chooses these people through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, all these people. They're God's chosen race, God's chosen people. And if you remember, toward the end of that whole Joseph story, they're starving, and Joseph kind of saves them, right? And they get brought to Egypt, and everything's great, and Joseph's in charge. But eventually, the Egyptians look at all of these Israelites and say, we've got a good workforce here. And they enslave them and begin to use them to build buildings and take over all this stuff. And the Israelites find themselves enslaved. And as you read the book of Exodus, that's the story of God using Moses, remember, to let my people go. And he goes to Pharaoh, and God does an incredible thing in this account where he saves his people from Egyptian slavery, and he says, I've got a better place for you. It's right over here. It's a land flowing with what? Remember what he said? Milk and honey, not Coke and Starbucks or whatever. He says, listen, I've got this great place for you. The only problem is there's some big old dudes there holding down fort. And they were what? They were afraid. And so they wandered the desert for 40 years. He says, I'm going to kill off all of you fraidy cats and wait till you all die. And then those young people that are not afraid, they're going to go into the promised land. And Moses dies off. Who takes over for him? Do you remember? Okay, Joshua goes and he takes over. And he takes over Moses' mantle and he leads the Israelites into the promised land. And yes, there are giants and there are enemies and there are all these things. And they take the land. And it's awesome. And they begin to divide the land among the 12 tribes of Israel. And so they say, you go there, you go there, you go there. And we'll all kind of live here where God has planted us. And all those enemies that they kicked out eventually got upset, right? Because they had taken their land and they said, well, we're going to get our land back. And so they began to have battles and fight the Israelites again. And instead of sometimes fighting, they would say, let's make a truce, and we'll give you some of our daughters, and you give us some of your daughters, and begin to intermarry pagan culture with God's culture here and his Hebrew people. And the culture began to really change. And then some battles would happen, and God would raise up judges. You know, that book of the Bible, Judges. And they're not like judges we know today. These were military, political leaders that would lead the Israelites into battle. And they would fight off these pagan cultures. Many of them that you know about. You've read these stories before. And this is where we find ourselves in the beginning of 1 Samuel. We find ourselves, Israel is broken. It's broken into a bunch of little places together. They're not really working together. They've been surrounded by pagan cultures. They've introduced these pagan practices into what God set them apart for. And it's chaos. It's absolute chaos at this point in the narrative. And God raises up these leaders that we're going to see. Turn to Judges chapter 19. I just want to give you a picture really quick here of how bad it was when Samuel's introduced to the narrative. If you read the end of Judges, chapter 19 through 21, I know that's 3 chapters, but over these chapters, there's a Levite man who's on a journey, and his wife goes home. She goes home to, she's like, whatever, she goes home, and he goes to Bethlehem to get her. And it's all in, it's in the promised land. It's in this area where cousins are living together and tribes are living in these areas, and this Levite man is on a journey back home, and he stops in a town called Gibeah, which was of the tribe of Benjamin, and this is a Levite, so these guys are cousins. And he spends the night there, and the men of the town, these Gibeonites, come and knock on the door and say, send the man out, this stranger out, we want to have our way with him. And the homeowner says, I can't send him out. So they send out his wife. And the men of this village have their way with this woman all night long. And she literally dies on the doorstep of the house. This Levite opens up the door in the morning to see what happens, and his dead wife is on the doorstep. He takes her dead body home, cuts it into 12 pieces, and sends those pieces to the different tribes of his cousins, and said, this happened in a Benjamite city. And civil war breaks out. They say this cannot happen. And so the 11 tribes gang up against the tribe of Benjamin, and their objective is to kill all the Benjamites. Kill them all. And this is where we find ourselves in this narrative. Look at the last verse of Judges. I've got it up here on the screen for you, 21-25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And this is what's important. And everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, why do I share a story so graphic and gnarly this morning? It's not to offend you or anything. But yes, this happened about 3,000 years ago. But doesn't it sound a lot like the world we live in today? That men and women did what was right in their own eyes. This is absolutely the same culture that we live in. God is far removed from our culture nowadays. And so I want for you not to just look at this series as a historical thing. Now these things, they literally happen. These are historical facts, yes. But they're also absolutely relevant to our day today, to our lives today. And what we're going to see in this series is God raising up men and women, young and old, to bring God's people back to them. Bring God's people back to Him. And I don't want you to have this idea that this was back then and all is just history. Listen, if we don't learn from our mistakes, we're bound to what? You know what that? Repeat them, right? And we've been repeating them time and time again. And God uses this book, this 1 Samuel letter, to raise up old people and young people, men and women, to draw the people back to God. And maybe, listen to me, maybe God's calling you to draw his people back to him. Maybe you're being called to be that catalyst at Cibola High School to draw that school to God. Maybe you're being called to be a prophet at your workplace to draw men and women back to God. And if we only look at this as historical or just learning some things about what happened in the past, we will miss it completely, the point of this series. And so I want for us to understand what this series is really all about. So it's serious. I know we get serious right from the very beginning. I know. I don't like doing that. Like, I like to kind of make jokes and, slide in there a little bit. But this series, although you're going to know many of the stories, I don't want you just to think of them as Bible school stories. But these are lessons we can learn to apply to our life today and tomorrow and for our grandkids if the world survives, right? If the world survives that long. And so let's continue. I want for us to look at the details of 1 Samuel. We know that this happens about 1100 BC. It was originally not 1st and 2nd Samuel. There was just one book of Samuel, okay? And we split it up into two. We thought it was better to do that, not Bob and I, right? People many, many years ago. Split it into two. We're not exactly sure of the author. It's probably 3 people. And we get this information from 1 Chronicles 29, verse 29 through 30. It says, "And all the events of King David's reign from beginning to end are written in the record of Samuel the seer." Seer, he saw things. He was a prophet. He could see the future, okay? "And the record of Nathan the prophet, and the record of Gad the seer. These accounts include the mighty deeds of his reign, of David's reign, and everything that happened to him and to Israel and to all the surrounding kingdoms." So we have solid evidence that this is kind of a collaboration between Samuel, Nathan, and Gad. Now we know that Samuel couldn't have written the whole thing because there's a lot of events in this book that happen after he's dead, okay? And dead men don't write things. They just don't, okay? And so it's probably pretty clear. We're going to be introduced in this series to some major players, and some of them are coming in right here in the very beginning of this very first chapter. We're going to see the birth and prediction of Samuel's birth and his influence in the kingdom here for a while. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in to it, and we're going to read the whole first chapter. And there's a lot of verses, y'all, and I know that, but we've got to read it all, okay? And so I'm going to begin reading. And there's so much, and I already am out of time, right, for today. And if you'll look at my Bible, just first chapter, I have so many notes written, so many little things down that we're not going to be able to get to. And it's probably going to happen week in and week out that we can't get to everything. So we're going to focus on 1 or 2 things and then really kind of drill down into those. But 1 Samuel chapter 1, starting here in the very first book of Samuel, it says this: "Now there was a certain man from," oh my gosh, we're ready, right? "Ramathaim Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim, and his name was," say that with me, "Elkanah." Okay, major player here. Okay, "Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had 2 wives." First of all, not a good idea. Okay, not a good idea. The name of one of them was Hannah. This is a good name. We have some people named Hannah at this church. You're going to see why. "And the name of the other was Peninnah." It always makes me think of the paninis, grilled paninis, right? So I've been hungry this whole week as I studied the scripture. It's weird. "And the name of the other was Peninnah, and Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh." Shiloh was where the tabernacle was. There was not yet a temple Right? Do you remember who builds the temple? Solomon. Solomon's not even a thought yet. Okay? He's coming close. There's no temple. There's a tabernacle. It's God's place. So they'd go up to Shiloh, and the two sons of Eli, important character here, his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord there. They're going to come in later. Okay, there's some major players here. They were priests to the Lord there. And when the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and her daughters. Verse 5. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah. But the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. Verse 7. And it happened, come on, and it happened year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her. So she wept and would not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Verse 9. Then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. And she, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. 11. This is an important verse here. I mean, they're all important, but we're going to come back to this one. And she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thy maidservant, and remember me, and not forget thy maidservant, but will give thy maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. That's why I'm growing my hair out. Okay? Verse 12. Now it came about, as she was continued to pray before the Lord, that Eli was watching her mouth. And as for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart only, but only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was what? Thought she was, old girl was drunk in the temple. She wasn't. Then Eli said to her, How long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you. But Hannah replied and said, No, Lord, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. This is a key here. I've poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant as a worthless woman, for I have spoken until now of my great concern and provocation. 17. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you've asked of him. And she said, Let your maidservant find favor in his sight, in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Okay, verse 19. I know we've still got some more. Here we go. Continuing the narrative. When they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord and returned again to their house in Ramah, and Elkanah had relations with Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. The Lord remembered her. And it came about in due time after Hannah had conceived that she gave birth to a son, and she named him, who? Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. Verse 21. Then the man Elkanah went up with all his household to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice. So they went every year. Okay, we'll get to that eventually. Went every year and pay his vow. For Hannah did not go up. For she said to her husband, I will not go up until the child is weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord and stay there forever. Verse 23. Elkanah said to her, do what seems best to you. Remain until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord confirm his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Now when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with a 3-year-old bull and 1 ephah of flour and a jug of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh, although the child was very young. Here we go, we're going to finish this up. Then they slaughtered the bull and brought the boy to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I asked of him. So I've also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he's dedicated to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. That's the first chapter. Now there's a lot. Listen, I know there is a lot going on there. I mean, yeah, look, I mean, I got a ton of notes already. And we're not going to be able to cover everything. If you've been hoping that we're going to go verse by verse, word by word, I'm sorry. We just cannot do that. But what we are going to do is look at some of the major things that stand out to us in these chapters. And really, as I thought about it, I'm trying to whittle down all of this stuff to really one point or one thing to look at in this account. And I want for us to look this morning at Hannah's pain, okay? And that's really what we're going to talk about this morning is Hannah's pain, because it is severe, and it's tragic. It's a tragic situation, and it's also, pain is something that we all deal with from time to time. We all deal with pain, and so it's a universal topic for us to discuss. But Hannah's pain was very, very real, wasn't it? I mean, this is real deal type of pain. She had no children, and that was crushing her. It was absolutely crushing this woman. And this is a very, very sensitive and very, very difficult problem for lots of couples, even today. Lots of couples deal with. We have multiple couples in this fellowship at Oasis Church that have for years dealt with this issue. Some, God has given them children and blessed them, and miracle babies have been born in this church. And others continue to pray. And so I do not want you at all to think that I can understand as a man what this type of problem is, certainly because we have kids. But I want you to know, ladies, if you are struggling with this, and I know about it, I have been praying for you all week as I've thought about this, and will continue to do so. I understand that this is difficult beyond words. My heart and my prayers go out to you if you deal with this specific issue. And I think for most people that are not in this type of situation, we really don't get it. And even the husband here doesn't get it, right? Look at what he says there in verse 8. Then Elkanah, her husband, says to her, Hannah, why do you weep and why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? No, right? You're not. The easy answer is no, you're not. And, you know, it's kind of funny, but it's very, very true, right? It's absolutely true. Hannah was in great distress. The physical problem that she was experiencing was causing emotional problems, right? That caused spiritual problems, and the emotional problems make the physical problems even worse, and it just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. And many of you have these types of things in your life. And listen, I don't want to only focus on barrenness as a problem, because most of you here do not deal with that. But I will say this, many of you, if not all of you, have dealt with a gut-wrenching, keep you up all night type of pain, right? And it's different for everybody here. Maybe this gut-wrenching, keep you up all night type of pain comes from losing someone you loved. Or maybe it comes from a divorce, whether you're the husband or wife or the kids. Or maybe it comes from having cancer. Or maybe it comes from that kid that you prayed for years and years and years, who's far from God now. You've got this prodigal son, and you don't know what he's doing, and it just keeps you up at night, and it makes you sick. Listen, pain is universal, y'all. And I don't want to make her situation, like, you know, not a big deal, because it's a huge deal. But if you only look at this as a barrenness issue, you've missed the point of the text. The point is that we all deal with this type of thing, this type of pain that never goes away. That it just keeps gnawing at you and gnawing at you and gnawing at you. And I don't know what it is for you. And if you've not dealt with that type of thing in your life yet, because we've got some young people here, it's coming. And if you're older and you've never dealt with a gut-wrenching, keep you up at night type of pain, then you've been blessed. But you are in the minority. And it's probably coming for you one day, because we live in a fallen world where bad things happen to good people. It's just reality. And for Hannah, I mean, we see Hannah, this awesome woman of God that dealt with a horrible situation. You want to talk about, I mean, I don't want to like put down Hannah. Think about Job. In my way worse situation for Job. And look at, just, I mean, I want for us to just for a second look at what she did. Like how do we deal with our pain? Because ultimately that's where I want for us to get this morning, because we all deal with pain. And I want for us to look at how Hannah dealt with her pain, because from the way that Hannah dealt with her pain, we learn how to deal with ours. And that's really the point of this morning. Let's answer that question. How did Hannah deal with her pain? She dealt with it very directly. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 14. Look at, we already read this. It says, then Eli said to her, how long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you. But Hannah replied, no, my Lord. I'm a woman oppressed in spirit. I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink. But I have, what did I highlight there? Poured out my soul before the Lord. If you're a note taker, that's your little fill in the blank. How do we deal with our pain? Number one, we pour out our soul, our heart to God. You got to pour out your heart to God. This is what she did. When she experienced her pain, she took it to the Lord. And we should too. And I just mentioned Job. I mean, Job was in a way, in my opinion, way worse situation, if you know the Job account. Way worse situation, and he has the exact same response to his pain. Look at it here, Job 30, verse 16 and 17. And this is him. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have seized me. At night it pierces my bones within me, and my gnawing pains take no rest. When your pain takes no rest, take it to the Lord. Pour out your soul to the Lord. When you can find no relief for that pain, you can find it in the Lord. And I know it's easy for me to say from upstage right now, because I don't know what you're going through. But y'all, I've dealt with this type of pain before. Not Hannah's type of pain, but my own type of pain. Take your pain to Him. Pour out your soul to Him. Pour out your heart to Him. Look at what it says in Lamentations 2:1. My eyes fail because of tears. My spirit is greatly troubled. My heart is poured out on the earth. 2:19. Arise and cry aloud in the night. At the beginning of the night watches, pour out your heart like water before the presence of the Lord. It's interesting to me that Hannah's interaction with the Lord was disturbing to Eli. He thought she was what? He thought she was drunk. Her interaction with the Lord was so primal, was so just, don't worry about what other people are thinking, uncontrollable tears, snot, ugly crying, you know, like mumbling. Have you ever been at that place where you're just broken before the Lord? It's not a fun place to be, right? Most recently, for me, I was at this type of place a couple years ago when our son was experiencing some really, really weird, like, seizure things. And I found myself getting ready for work one day, in the walk-in closet, and I just broke down. And the ugly cry, do you know what I mean? Not the cute cry, the ugly snot and tears and just crying out in indecipherable words to the Lord for God to heal him. And you know what? He did. We give all praise and glory to the Lord for that. But it wasn't because of anything that I had done or didn't do or anything like that. But my response was finally to break down the barriers of my heart, the walls of my heart, and just let it all out to him, which is what Hannah was doing here. She poured out her soul to the Lord. It's no fun to be there, but I think you'll agree with me, if you've been in that place, they're sometimes the most sweetest moments with God. And this is what happens for Hannah. And when you pour out your heart to God, we need to also believe, this is your next fill in the blank for you note takers, you need to believe that God hears you. How do we deal with our pain? We pour it out to the Lord, and then we have to believe that he hears us. Verse 17 and 18, then Eli answered and said, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you've asked of him. And she said, you let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. You see, Eli gave Hannah a sense of belief that God would hear her, that he did hear her, that he was going to do something about her situation. And he did, right? He absolutely did. It changed her outlook. It changed her mood. It says she goes away no longer sad. We need to believe that God listens to us and that he will grant our request, just like he did. He actually did grant her request. It came about in due time. After Hannah had conceived, she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, because I've asked of him of the Lord. If we don't believe that God hears us, then why even pray? Right? Like if you don't believe that he hears you, then why even pray at all? And trust me, it doesn't really make sense to me that the Lord of the universe would listen to me, right? Like of all the people on earth, I am the least qualified to speak to God. And I don't understand why he would listen to me, but I believe that he does, and I know that he does, and so I continue to do it. It's almost like electricity, right? Like you don't have to understand how someone has figured out how to bottle lightning, right? And distribute it to all your houses, and then it goes into these plugs. Like you don't have to figure out electricity to blow your hair with a blow dryer, right? You just turn it on and do it. You don't have to believe and understand everything to blow or dry your hair. You just do it because you've done it for so many years, and it turns on, and then one day it does, and you're like, oh, I need a new one. Like you don't have to understand it all to believe that it works and to use the thing. Believe that God hears you. The Lord hears your prayers, and he's sovereign. And that means that he decides when he answers and how he answers. You don't get to decide that. He gets to decide that. And so there may be some prayers that you give to God that, like I said, we had people in this very church that prayed and prayed and prayed to God that they would have a child, and for years they did not, and then they did. And God gave them a few children. And we have some other couples who've been praying and praying and praying and praying for years and still have not had any kids. God decides when he answers. And that you may like that and you may not like that. But it is the truth because he is in charge. And some answers come today, and some answers come 2 years from now, and some answers come 5 years from now and 20 years from now. It's just the way God works. And so after we go to the Lord, after we pour out our heart to Him and we believe that He hears us, the third step is to return. This is what Hannah did. Return to God what He's already given you. To return to God what He's given you. Back to verse 11. She made a vow. Come on, 11. It don't like, here we go. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on my affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord. She said, God, if you give me a son, I'm going to give him back to you. That's what she says. And a razor shall never come upon his head. That's a Nazirite vow. That was a vow by a parent that, we're not going to cut his hair. A Nazirite vow was, you don't cut his hair, don't touch dead bodies, don't eat or drink anything from grapes, and don't drink alcohol. And those were like the things you had to do, and that kid would be set apart for the Lord. Samson, his parents, made a Nazirite vow. Remember, he had the long hair, and then his power got all, he cut his hair off, and power all went away. She said, God, if you give me a son, I'll give him back to you. And she did, right? She did it. She returned what was given to her. 27 and 28, look right here. Come on, clicker. For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I asked of him. So I've also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. Hannah placed this young boy in the service of Eli, the priest, at the tabernacle. And it must have been the most difficult thing she'd ever had to do. If you ask me, sorry, you're not having my kid, right? It's just not happening. I read a quote from a pastor about this very topic. He says this about Hannah. He says, she was saying, I know I suffered long, and I know you gave me a child, and I want to hold on to him, but as hard as it will be, I give him back to you. Yes, I know it's my child, but I'm giving him back to you. I love my son, but I love you more. I need my son, but I need you more. I want my son, but I want you more. He belongs to me, but he belongs to you more. I gave birth to him, but you gave life to him. My son wants me, but he will want you more. Yes, my son needs me, but he needs you more. My son loves me, but he will love you more, so I'm giving him back to you. What a powerful narrative of what might have been going through Hannah's mind. And as you think about it, returning to God, back to him, what he's given you, really it just makes sense. It just makes sense for us. Because everything that we have in life, every blessing that we have in life comes from the Lord. The money that you've got in your pocket, the clothes that you have on, the nice car that you drive, the house that you live in, the vacations that you go on, those are all blessings from the Lord. Your family, the spouse that you have, the kids that you have, the brothers and sisters and parents and in-laws maybe not in-laws, but all of those people in your life are blessings from the Lord. And I know maybe some of you in here that say, well, I'm a self-made, I earn my money, I earn my job, I earn this house, so arrogant for us to think that we earned those things, right? Who gave you, when you were a little kid, the ability to learn math or get good grades that turned into a scholarship, that turned into going to a good college, that turned into you getting a degree, that turned into you getting a good job, that turned into you getting good pay so you could eventually buy that house that you say you bought on your own? Who was there the whole time? Who started it all out? The Lord did, right? The Lord did. And so for us to return back to the Lord what He's already given us. It just makes sense. And maybe you've been praying for a spouse for years and years and years, and now you're engaged. And He's given you the desire of your heart. Our job at that point is to say, okay, God, how can I honor you in this marriage? How can I give back to you what you've given to me? Maybe you've been begging God for a great job and now you're there. And you got to say, God, how can I give back to you what you've already given to me? How can I use this job that you've given me to glorify you? How can I be a light in this dark place that I work in? It is our responsibility, friends, to be a blessing. We are blessed to be a blessing to those around us. And what's interesting, and many of you have already learned this, when God pours out blessings on you and you distribute those blessings to others, you know what He does? He keeps pouring on you. And many of us say, I got these things, I want to keep these things, and we hold on to them and they just stay there. And what happens when you begin to distribute those blessings to others, God keeps pouring on you because He sees, I'm going to bless a bunch of people through you, so He just keeps pouring on you and you scatter it out. This is the type of life that God wants for you. And I don't want you to cheat, but I want you, maybe if you're interested, to see what happens to Hannah's future and the blessing that God gave her in this child that she gave back to Him. God blesses her again.